collected all sorts of funny anecdotes and hadiths and so on, and they're all here. But don't worry, I'm not going to torture you through all of this. We'll just, you know, take it as far as time allows. And I've written them down because I can't keep the names straight. So the isnads kind of like all get mixed up in my head. So this is why I need a cheat list. To start with, I just want to say a couple of things about how this topic is very unusual, or not unusual, but forgotten, because, well, right now we have this image of the Muslims, you know, they're grim-faced with bushy eyebrows and wild beards and always looking forbidden and all that, and with all sorts of things like the cartoon crisis and so on. The image has kind of developed that Muslims can't take a joke or they don't have a sense of humor, and this is absolutely not true. Because Muhammad and his companions were quite a merry group of people, and they enjoyed laughing, as we will see shortly. The hadith collections are full of hadiths that end with, and the Prophet laughed so hard that you could see his molar teeth. So it means that he laughed loudly, he enjoyed the laugh, and so on. But later on, these hadiths were edited, and the laugh turned into he smiled, barely, without any noise. You couldn't hear it, you could just see it, and at some point during the history, it became like laughing was undignified, and this is absolutely not. Sometimes they edited the hadith so stupidly that you could actually feel and see for yourself that it was edited. Like there is one that comes to mind where a man comes to visit the Prophet, and Aisha is supposed to be in another room, and then she hears them smile. So she goes into the room to see what they were smiling about. And this obviously doesn't make sense, because, I mean, I've tried, but I couldn't hear anyone smile. So we will start with the straight-laced witticisms, gentle word plays, the things that don't raise any religious eyebrows. I have to remind you that you have to think that this is a culture far, far removed from our times, so probably they are groaners for us today, but for them they were hilarious. But whatever it is, it's indicative of, you know, unpretentiousness and informal relation between the Prophet and his followers and so on. So the first one is, first example, a woman approaches the Prophet to ask something on behalf of her husband. And he inquires about her husband's name. And she answers so-and-so. And he excitedly asks, "Ah, you mean the fellow with whiteness in his eye?" And the woman is very quick to correct him. And she says, "My husband has no whiteness in his eye. I'm sure of it." And the Prophet replies back and he says, "No, he has whiteness in his eye." And she says, No, I'm very sure he doesn't." And he smiles and he points to his eye and says, "Everybody has a whiteness in their eye." Groaned. But anyway, this is just for starters. There is another similar style one, where a man comes to the Prophet and requests to be given a mount to ride. And the Prophet promises him that he will provide him with an offspring of a she-camel. And the man is very critical, and he says, "What am I supposed to do with it? You know, a little small camel. I need a full-grown camel." And the Prophet laughs and says, "Every full-grown camel is also the son of a she-camel, or the offspring of a she-camel." And another one from Ali ibn Abi Talib. He was very fond of word games, and once there was a Zoroastrian who offered him a honey roll in honor of the Iranian New Year. Nowruz. I don't know if anyone of you speaks Iranian. And literally Nowruz is new day. So Ali says every day is Nowruz. And this was his way of, celebrating a festival that isn't his. So, converting the name into, every day is a new day, so we celebrate a new day rather than the Persian New Year or the Zoroastrian religious festival. There is another story about Ali with a Jew who approached him and said, I have heard that Muhammad claimed in every pomegranate there is one garden of Eden seed, and when this seed is consumed, the person who ate it will enter paradise. So I bought a pomegranate and I ate the whole thing. So Ali replied, the Prophet told the truth. And then he reached over and took a little seed out of his beard. And he said, this is the seed. And he ate it. So. Remaining with the Jews and the afterlife, we are told that the Prophet once was preaching about the end of days. And he said, on the day of resurrection, the earth will be like a cake of dough, and the Almighty will turn it upside down, just as any one of you turns over like a pancake. So at this point, a Jew arrived on the scene and addressed Muhammad, saying, may the merciful bless you, Abul Qasim. Shall I tell you about the feast prepared for the denizens of paradise? Certainly, replied the Prophet, well, on that day the entire earth will turn into a cake of dough. And this comes from Jewish belief about, the end of days. But they all burst out laughing because he was just saying the same thing when the Jew came and said the same thing. So, there is Yusuf ibn Muhammad al-Suhaybi, related from his father that his father came from Mecca and stayed with the Prophet and Abu Bakr. And at one point, the Prophet entered and heard Suhaib complaining of a pain in his eye while he was eating dates. So Muhammad told him, why are you complaining, Suhaib? Are you eating the date with your sick eye? And Suhaib answered, no, I'm eating with the healthy orifice. And they all laughed until one could see their molars. Of course, the question was deliberately irrelevant because eating dates has nothing to do with eyes, but there is another version of this hadith where the Suhaib replies, out of the 3 almond-shaped openings in my face, I'm consuming the date with the help of the one that is not diseased. So the Prophet invited Malik to enter his goat-skin tent. They were on the way to somewhere, so it was a tent. And he said, all of me? And yes, all of you came to answer. So such little, things, conversation starters, but it shows how effortless these pleasantries were and that they really didn't adhere to all this strictness and seriousness. They also knew how to laugh. So now we move from those groaners to the childish things. The Prophet would joke with his companions, and there was a playful atmosphere. For example, Ali was found by his father-in-law. You know that Ali was married to Fatima. And he was fast asleep, and he was sleeping actually in the dirt. And he had stormed out of the house in anger over a fight with Fatima. And instead of yelling at her, he preferred to go out. And then he lay down and just fell asleep. So he got the nickname Abu Turab, father of dirt, because of that. And Zayd ibn Thabit was nicknamed Abu Ruqad, the father of sleep, because he too had dozed off at some point, and the companion stole his clothes. So Abu Huraira is father of the kitten. He received his nickname because Muhammad noticed that he had picked up a little stray kitten and he put her in his sleeve. So he got the name Abu Huraira, father of the kitten. And Anas ibn Malik received the name Zul Uzunayn, he with the 2 ears. So it's, everybody has 2 ears, but this is a word play on Zul Qarnayn, who is Alexander, because he had 2 horns on his, what do you call it? Helmet, yeah. So, we have him, Aisha also became Humayra, the little red one, because some books say that she had a very fair complexion and reddish hair, and some other books said that when she got excited, her face turned red, so she became the little red one. And when Muhammad spoke to the children, he always called them Ya Laka'i, dirty face. So he would also play with his grandsons, place them on his shoulders while praying, splash them with the water of his bath, lift them up to give them better views, smear their faces with liquids and foodstuffs, take an interest in their games, sometimes stick his tongue out at them, kiss their belly buttons, and a very common occurrence was when he was playing with these children, they would urinate on him. And he wasn't really upset or disgusted. He wouldn't give the garment away to be washed. In one instance, he declared that the smell reminded him of musk. So he was very easygoing and playful with the children. On one occasion, Khalid ibn Sa'id brought his little daughter to see him, and she recalls later, she says, I was wearing a yellow shirt and the messenger of God said to me, pretty, pretty. And I went over and started playing with his mole. He had the seal of the prophecy was a mole. So her father scolded her, but the prophet said, let her be. And then he told her, may you live long to wear out many garments. So he wasn't really forbidding, and his person was not inviolate. He allowed people to touch him, to pull whatever. We will see that later. I have more of these things. Jabir ibn Abdullah said that he entered the Prophet's house and Hassan and Hussein were on his back while he was on all fours. He was crawling around and they were riding him. And he was saying, what an excellent camel your camel is, and what wonderful load you two are. So, and similar scenes take place at prayer while he would be prostrating, the children would come and just sit on his back because they were used to him, doing that. So, the earliest, they also used to, the Prophet and the companions, they used to sit around the fireplace and sing songs and bombard one another with like desert gourd. They're small, like squash round things. And when they were on their way to perform a greater or a lesser pilgrimage, this is what they would be throwing at each other for fun. But when they were in Medina, they were hurling watermelons at each other for fun. So food fight was not a new invention. They used to have these food fights. Aisha had a food fight of her own. She was in her room and she cooked a meal. It's called khazira. It's a thick stew kind of thing. And Sauda came to visit, and the Prophet was there, and Aisha offered her the food, and she refused. And Aisha got angry because she had really, put effort into making it. And she told Sauda, "You will eat it or I will smear it on your face." And Sauda said, "I will not eat it." So she just took some out of the bowl and smeared it on her face. And the Prophet was sitting between the both of them, and he grabbed Aisha and held her down and called Sauda to take revenge. So Sauda took some out and smeared it on Aisha's face. So they all laughed together. And well, he didn't really have a home per se, but he lived in his wife's apartments every night in a different apartment. So one can imagine kind of like this whole comedy salon would take place in, maybe even in the mosque, because all the rooms were built around the mosque and they had entrances from the mosque. So, for people to be recording this, there must have been witnesses. So, anyway. On one occasion in Muhammad's home, I don't know what to call it, but at least in the place where he was at that night, there was a witty and humorous companion, Usayd ibn Hudayr, and he was entertaining the people, and the Prophet kind of like crept up on him from behind and poked him in the ribs from behind, and Usayd cried out loud, "That hurt!" And the Prophet incited him, "Iqtas, take your revenge." And he said he wasn't really sure whether he should do this or not, but he told him, "It's not fair, you're wearing a shirt and I'm not." So the Prophet took off his shirt and said, there, yeah. So instead of poking him, he kissed his belly button. And the Prophet was very angry with the brother of Salama, and she wanted to make peace between them. So she invited him into her apartments when she knew that the Prophet was coming. And when Muhammad arrived, he came and he did the same thing. He seized him from the back and gave him a hug. And so the Prophet laughed and he forgave him whatever it was that he was mad at him about. So this coming hadith is also one that was manipulated later to edit out the laughter. So we have this same humorous companion, Usayd, and he reported that there was an Ansari man who liked to joke, and he would speak to the people and make them laugh, and the Prophet condemned him and attacked him. But this is the hadith that we just talked about when Muhammad took off his shirt. So Usayd was demoted from being a direct companion to just being a narrator of the hadith. And the playful poke in the ribs ended up being condemned as an attack. So he attacked him because he was saying a joke. And this is how they manipulated the recording of the hadith to edit out the laughter and pranks, really, poking each other and all that. Anas ibn Malik tells us that there was a Bedouin named Zahir ibn Haram with whom the Prophet had some transactions. They were doing business, and he was actually also very fond of him. So he would say, "Zahir is our desert and we are his town," because, as a Bedouin, he was not living in town, he was in the desert. So one day Muhammad saw him in the street displaying his goods and selling them, and he approached him from behind and gave him a hug. And he said, "Who's that? Who's that?" Because of course he couldn't see who was doing this to him. And Muhammad didn't reply, but he started yelling, "I am selling this slave. Who wants to buy this slave?" And Zahir said, he recognized his voice and he said, I'm afraid you will find it very difficult to move this merchandise. In a similar vein, Salama narrates a story about 1 year before the Prophet passed away. Abu Bakr was off with a caravan to Basra, and the caravan was accompanied by a very well-known joker called Nu'aym. And Nu'aym will pop up later. He's all over the place with the jokes. He's a really funny one. So at some point during the journey, Nu'aym, he was perpetually hungry and perpetually begging for food, but the food was rationed. So there is this guy, Salit, who was rationing the food, and Nu'aym goes to him and begs him, give me some, I want some now. And he refuses. So he says, okay, fine. And another caravan passes them from the opposite direction. So Nu'aym goes and sells them solid. And he tells them that he is a very, this slave, he talks back, and he refuses to be sold, so he will tell them that he's not really a slave, and he will tell them that he's his cousin, and he will refuse to be sold, and they should not listen to him because this is his habit. And the people, they say, okay, fine, and he sells him for food. So when Abu Bakr comes to the people, they take him, and he, of course, he refused to be sold, and I'm not a slave, and there is this whole commotion, and they, being told by Nu'aym that this is what he was going to do, they ignored it, they just tied him and took him away. And then Abu Bakr had to ride back to these people and buy back to the guy. So Salama recounts that this anecdote was told and told and told all over again and again for the whole year until the Prophet died. So, we can kind of imagine them sitting in front of the campfire, and someone would go, remember that time when Nu'aym, and everyone would laugh, and you'd have like gazillions of versions of this story by everyone. I find this to be very warm. So it's not only food fights that they had, but they also had 100-yard dashes. It's not something one would associate with a prophet or a religious persona, but he used to challenge Aisha to small races, and in the beginning she used to beat him. But then later on, after a couple of years of marriage, she put on weight and so on. So he used to beat her, and then he would say, this is for that. I mean, I beat you this time for all those times that you beat me. And we also have practical jokes. So Osman ibn Abi Ata narrates from his father that the Prophet was sleeping in Aisha's quarters, and he woke up before she did. So he took her braid and he tied it to the bedpost. And then he called her and she awoke with a startle, and this is when he laughed. And some people overdid things like that. So we have Ibn Abi Layla saying that one of the companions was sleeping and on some tour to the battle. So they took him and they tied him to something, and then they woke him up, and he hurt himself. So the Prophet said, not to take it too far, because a prank should not end up hurting anyone. As long as it is a harmless prank, then yes, but nobody should get hurt. And the wives, they also had all sorts of pranks, playing them on each other, because they were all jealous. Each one of them wanted the Prophet to herself. So one day, Aisha and Hafsa were walking and they saw Sauda coming, and she was dressed up. She had received a gift from somewhere, a Yemeni blouse, and a Yemeni headdress. So she had makeup on her face, and she was looking really pretty. And they got jealous, so they hatched a plan. So Hafsa went and she told Sauda, the one-eyed Antichrist has appeared, the Dajjal is coming. And Sauda, she got really terrified and said, where should we hide? We need to hide from him. And they pointed to this tent that was far away, and it was like a storage area. It was full of cobwebs, dust, and everything. So she ran and she hid inside the tent, and they were standing outside laughing their head off. And the Prophet arrives and he says, what are you laughing about? And they couldn't even tell him. They were cracking up, and they just pointed to the tent, and he went and he found a miserable, trembling, terrified Sauda. So he rescued her from the hiding place, and he cleaned her face and all that, and they were still laughing. There is another one, but this time the gang is different. It's Aisha and Sauda ganging up against Hafsa. And this story is told in a number of versions, with the protagonist being someone else. So it's told about Hafsa, it's told about Salama, it's told about Safiya. So you have different wives in the sources with this very same story. And the two Aisha and Sauda, they also change. Sometimes it's Aisha and Hafsa, sometimes it's Hafsa and Sauda. So we're not really sure which story is the correct one, but you have two against one. And these two, they realize that this one is, the Prophet is visiting her and staying longer than he should. So they were keeping an eye on each other, how long. And they hire this servant to find out what's happening. Why is he staying in that room for so long, longer than he should? So they discovered that someone had given her a gift of a particular honey, and that he liked honey. So when he went to visit her, she used to offer him this honey, and he used to sit and, dip something, little bread pieces or something, and eat it. And they decided that they knew that he hates bad smells. So they hatch a plan. And when he comes in the night, she says, I smell something weird on your breath. Did you eat this particular fruit? It's a stinky fruit. And he said, no, I didn't. I only ate honey. And she said, maybe then the bees, they fed on the flowers of that fruit. So he stopped going. But in all the versions of the stories, Sauda gets guilty conscious and she confesses. A similarly entertaining harem jealousy is the father of Hamza ibn Abi Usaid al-Sa'di. Says that the Prophet married Asma bint al-Nu'man. The marriage was arranged for political, tribal reasons. And they brought her to him, and Hafsa and Aisha, they saw her and saw how beautiful she was, and they got very jealous, and they hatched a plan to get rid of her. So they entered the tent, and they said, we will help you, we will make you pretty, and one of them combed her hair, and the other one put henna on her hands, and the makeup, and so on. And then they told her, we've been married to him for so long, and we will give you tips about what he likes. And he really, really likes it when the woman plays hard to get. So you should not give in to his endearments, and in fact you should turn your face and say, A'udhu Billah. So she believed them, and when the marriage was performed and he took her to the tent to consummate the marriage, she did exactly as they told her. And when she said, "A'udhu billah." He hid his face and said, you know, I never take a woman against her will. So he leaves and he calls the man who brought her, and he gives him gifts, and he says, you know, take her back. I don't marry anyone against their wish. So she is very, very upset, and she calls herself the Wretched One. She changes her name to the Wretched One, and feels very bad that she listened to the other women. Abdullah ibn Wahb narrates that Layth said that Abdullah ibn Hudayfa was a prankster, and he used to loosen the saddle of the Prophet's camel. So sometimes when the camel got really going, the saddle would turn and the Prophet would find himself upside down. And he actually laughed. He didn't take this badly or anything. And later on, he used to check whether the saddle was loosened or not, because it happened a couple of times. So we all know about his leniency and mercy, and we have a lot of stories that show that. Some of them are funny. So Sa'd ibn Abi Waqqas says that Umar ibn al-Khattab came knocking at the door of the messenger at one point, and he sat there in the house of one of his wives, or in the room rather, and he had a whole group of women from Medina sitting there, shrieking, shouting, everyone asking gazillions of questions at the same time, and they were very loud and very animated, like women sometimes are when they're comfortable and in a big group. And Umar knocks on the door and goes, "Ya Satir," you know, to announce his that he's coming in. And all of a sudden, everyone falls silent, the women, and they grab their veils and cover their hair and adjust their clothing, and because Umar is coming, Umar is coming. And the Prophet just bursts out laughing. And the moment Umar enters, he says, "May God make your teeth laugh, Umar." And Umar says, "You know, you need to explain that greeting." And he says, "Well, I'm laughing at these women. When they heard your voice at the door, they covered up, they, you know, got themselves in order, in shape, in whatever." And Umar got really upset and said, "But it's you who they should fear." And he yells at the women, "You are enemies of yourselves. You should fear the Prophet, you should revere him, and not me." And one of the women, in most of the versions it's Salama, because she was related to Umar and had a strong personality, but there are other women, and she says, "Actually, Umar, you are much harsher than the Prophet, you know, he's one of us." So the Prophet laughed and said to Umar, "By him in whose hands is my life, if the devil himself would run into you on the street, he would cross to the other side."
That's what my mother said about me.
So there is another version of, well, it's not a version, but it's different, but similar, with a different identity of the visitor. Abu Bakr came knocking at the door of the Prophet, and he heard from inside Aisha raising her voice to the Prophet and arguing loudly. She didn't agree with whatever it was that, when he entered, he got so upset, and he grabbed Aisha by her shoulders and he was going to slap her. He yelled at her, "How dare you raise your voice to your husband, to the Prophet of God?" And the Prophet intervened and prevented him from hitting her. And then after Abu Bakr left, he went and joked with Aisha, "Did you saved you from that man?
Special favor.
Yeah. So we just saw that his attitude towards, you know, what's rearranged or lapsed modesty was just to laugh it off. I mean, he didn't mind that their veils fell off and so on. So this also is similar to a report by Abu Huraira, where a man came crying to the Prophet saying, I'm ruined, and God will never forgive me. And he was so upset, crying and sniffling. And the Prophet says, okay, what ruined you? Why are you ruined? You know, tell me. And he says, I was fasting and I couldn't resist, and I had sex with my wife during the day. So the Prophet said, are you able to free a slave in penance? And he said, no, I'm not, I'm a poor man. So the Prophet said, are you able to feed 60 poor people? And he said, I can hardly feed myself and my family. So the Prophet said, okay, fine. He called for one of the servants to bring a basket full of dates, and he gave them to the man, and he said, distribute those in charity. So the man says, I distribute them to poor people? And the Prophet said, yes. And he says, by God, there is no household in the entire of Medina that is poorer than mine. So the Prophet laughed until you could see his teeth, and he said, okay, go and feed your family with it. This one is good. It's a bit risky, but so the well-known Amr ibn al-As was with the companions, and they were going to do battle somewhere near Syrian border, and it was very, very cold. It was winter, and there was snow, and they weren't used to this at all. And they slept in the night, and he had a wet dream. So he woke up in the morning, and he knew that he needed to do ghusl and wash his clothes, and he really, really didn't want to do that because the water was cold and the weather was cold. And he said, okay, when there is no water, we do tayammum with the sand, so I'm going to do that. So he takes the sand and he does his ghusl with the sand. And some of the companions, they see that and they don't understand, and they go and they ask him, what the hell are you doing? And he explains, and they tell him, you know, this is not possible. This doesn't work this way. You have to do your ghusl. You have to wash your clothes. And he is absolutely adamant that it works. This is working. So they take him to the Prophet, and they tell the Prophet he did that and that and that and that. And the Prophet says, you know, when there is water available, no matter how cold or hot the liquid is, you have to use it. So he says, Amr ibn al-As, he says, you told us in the Qur'an that a verse says, do not kill yourselves, for God is ever merciful. And if I wash myself and my clothes with this cold water, I'm going to die. So they all laugh, and the Prophet said, okay, this time we will let it slide, but no more. And remaining with the subject of tayammum, Umar ibn al-Khattab and Ammar ibn Yasir, they went out once with the sheep, and one of them also had the wet dream. The versions are also sometimes attributing it to Umar and sometimes to Ammar ibn Yasir. So I believe personally that it's Ammar ibn Yasir, because the plot couldn't have been Umar, because he also remembers tayammum and he throws himself in the sand and literally rolls in it over and over again. they also go to the Prophet and so on and tell him, and the Prophet said, but they didn't have water. I mean, the difference from the first story is that these two, they did not have any water. So they go to the Prophet, and the Prophet laughs when he hears the story, and he says, actually, you did too much. All you need to do is grab the sand and pat it, and then wipe your face. So we have another story about Humour.
No visions of people breath.
Yeah. So Humour ibn Khubayri was sitting with a group of women from the Banu Ka'b at the side of the road, and the women were doing magic. They were braiding things and so on. So the Prophet paused them and he gave them a look. What are you doing? And Humour replied, they are, well, they are, and he was, trying to find a way, and said, they are doing divination because one of my camels has strayed, and they're doing this for me to find my camel. So years later, this guy converts to Islam, and the Prophet meets him while riding on a donkey. And he says with a twinkle in his eye, did you find that wayward camel of yours? And the guy grins and says, yes, ever since I became a Muslim, the camel has never strayed. There is another story which has been used for a ridiculous fatwa, the breastfeeding of adults. So actually, in my collection, it's humorous. Because Sahla bint Suhail, she had a foster son, and he grew up, and all of a sudden when he was a teenager, her husband didn't want him around anymore and wanted to throw him out because he was jealous. He felt that maybe he was giving her looks or something that he shouldn't. So Sahla bint Suhail, she was very upset because she raised the kid and she didn't want to give him up. So she goes to the Prophet and tells him the story and asks for his advice. And the Prophet said, nurse him. When you nurse him, he will turn into a milk relative and then you can keep him. And she protests and she says, but how can I do that? He's a grown man. And the Prophet laughed and said, don't you think I know he's a grown man? So she leaves and she goes home and she tells her husband. And her husband doesn't like that idea at all. But ever since, he no longer objected to her having him in the house. Because that's a lot better than nursing him. I mean, I still have some more, but whenever we're out of time, just give a holler, yeah?
Are we going to have a discussion about it? Maybe you can, that's a good place for now.
Okay.
I would like to thank Yasmin for those wonderful anecdotes. I should say, for those who came in a bit late as well, that Yasmin is currently a PhD candidate in Exeter University, researching humour in prophetic traditions, the Hadith, and she has more than 20 years of experience in the corporate world, working in various capacities in education, finance, state technology, investment in Egypt, and her academic research interests are in Hadith, early Islamic history, Qur'an studies, and the intersection between Islamic and gender studies. I'm sure Yasmin can say more about herself. But we're going to open up the floor now at this stage. So any questions, any comments, any more jokes, anyone wants to throw in about Islamic traditions, then you're welcome to.
And where did you find the texts?
They are in Hadith collections, in Sira works, in Nawadir collections. There is a genre in Arabic literature, especially medieval Arabic literature. It's called Adab al-Nawadir. It's
is it a strong? Are they strong hadiths? Not really hadiths, they're more jokes.
Some of them are and some of them aren't. And if you talk to very orthodox scholars, they will always tell you that those hadiths that have the Prophet laughing until his molar teeth show are all forged. And have a weak isnad, have someone in the isnad who isn't really trustworthy. So they want to eliminate this image of him as a laughing, humane, real person. They want to put him on a pedestal up there where nobody can touch him.
Unsurprisingly, I'd like to go to the breastfeeding thing. And the reason for that is this hadith was quoted in Muwatta of Imam Malik. Is that where you got it from? That's all.
I can see where.
Because I want to see why they interpreted it the opposite.
No, I got it from Musnad ibn Hanbal, Ahmad ibn Hanbal.
Okay.
Also one of the.
So perhaps the Muwatta did not show this background of this fatwa of the Prophet.
I really don't know how they collected them, but I know, or because they compiled these collections, and you need to remember that the compiler has an agenda.
Fair enough, yeah, no.
So he will probably include what he feels should be propagated and exclude what he feels.
Malik believed that you have to do it, right? 5 times or 10 times, there's a bit of a difference there. But did Ibn Hanbal say, no, actually, no, it's just a joke?
No, he stops at that she went home and told her husband, and her husband no longer objected to the boy being there.
Yasmin, when did this editing of the humorous side of the Prophet happen, and where and who by? Who decided?
When it started very, let's say around, it was after the Abbasids, because the Abbasids were very lenient, and they were happy-go-lucky folks, they drank, they did everything wrong that was possible.
Did you say Ahlul
No,
No,
Abbasids.
Okay, sorry.
So it started little by little. It wasn't removed immediately. It was first, he laughed. They took out the teeth bit. He laughed so that you could see his back teeth. They removed the back teeth bit, so he just laughed. And then gradually the laugh was changed into a smile. And then by the time of Al-Ghazali, there was nothing left. Because Al-Ghazali in his Ihya Ulumuddin, he has an entire chapter about how too much laughing dulls the soul, and that you should fear God, and laughter kills respect and all that. So basically he was one step short of declaring laughter haram. Even though the Qur'an in Surah Al-Najm, it says that God created laughter and He made us laugh and He made us cry. So it's a acceptable emotion.
Sorry, is there a genealogy of this editing, following up Hayat's question?
Not really, because nobody wants to admit that the hadiths were manipulated.
Now,
So,
how did you detect the
if you put the versions of the hadith in chronological order,
okay,
Muwatta being the first, and then maybe Suyuti being at the very end, you can actually see what was taken off, what was added, because like for example this Aisha one, where she goes to the room to see what they were smiling about, this is a much later version. I haven't found the original version where she hears him laugh and thereby goes to see.
In that one where you said that she heard them smiling, and that's obvious edit, are there any other examples?
Yeah, there is the one about how when he hugged this guy from behind, it was turned into, you know, an aggressive action, whereas it was actually a prank. There are many more.
Sorry. Two things. First of all, the lighter issue. I think that I came across that hadith about the stomach, whatever, and what I actually perceived from it, which is what made me giggle, is because that was something I used to do to my youngest sister, when she was a baby, which I think a lot of people do, which is blow a raspberry on their belly button. So in fact, that's what I thought, that's what had happened. But more importantly, I just wonder, I'm finding it almost impossible to contextualize a timeline for the development and collation of the different hadiths. Could you tell me when, after his death, did the first hadith appear?
No, this is not possible because the hadith were already circulating before he died.
Oh, I see.
You had people who were very conscientious and pious. They were writing everything down that he said so that they would remember. So there were already collections, but they were private collections in people's possession. For example, it is said that Abu Huraira had a collection of 473 hadiths.
That's right.
And you have to put this in context. Abu Huraira converted to Islam only 3 years before the Prophet died. So in those 3 years, he collected 473 hadiths. But then, now, today, Abu Huraira is the most quoted narrator, the biggest supplier of hadith in all the collections. And if you do he supplies even more hadith than Aisha, who was his wife. So, who put them in his mouth, God only knows.
Where did you get this 473 figure, please? Is it Tabaqat al-Kubra?
No, in Tabaqat al-Kubra, they don't even acknowledge him as a, companion, because he was kind of a servant. Tabaqat al-Sa'ad, they don't... and later on, there are a lot of problems with Abu Huraira in particular. Umar ibn Khattab had him flogged.
Yes.
For saying hadith. Aisha had a cat fight with him in the marketplace. She actually fought with him in front of everybody, and she called him a liar, and you are putting words in the Prophet's mouth, and he never said this. It was a public instance where there was a funeral passing by, and Abu Huraira and people were, putting sand on their hair and crying about the deceased and so on. And he said, the Prophet said that if you cry over a deceased, the deceased will be tortured with every tear that you cry. And Aisha said, this is bullshit, because the Qur'an says, لَا تَزِرُ وَزِرَ وِزْرَ أُخْرَى. There is no punishment.
No bearer shall bear the burden of another.
Yes, exactly. So this guy is dead.
No bearer shall bear the burden of another.
Ah, okay.
So this guy is dead. So why should he be punished for something that you are doing? His punishment is finished with his death. So this is not possible. And there was a huge, and Umar, it was in the reign of Umar, I think, that this happened. And Umar said, if I hear you saying a hadith one more time, you're going to be flogged. And he later on flogged him.
Was it over this particular?
The flogging was not over this particular hadith, but apparently he didn't learn his lesson.
But coming back to the... Sorry,
so the collection is really, you can't say, but the first attempt to have a sifting of the circulating hadith was al-Bukhari. I mean, you before that you had they are called al-Musnad. So the Musnad is by a specific narrator. So you will have, for example, Musnad Salama. They are all the hadiths that Salama related. And in my personal opinion, I believe that the Musnad was more accurate because you could actually judge the veracity of the hadith. Because, for example, Salama is a Prophet's wife. She lived with him for so and so many years. You would expect her hadith to be of a certain quality. She was known to have very good relation with Fatma and Ali. So she's a very preferred narrator in the Shia collections. She went with him on each and every battle that he fought after they got married. So you can expect to find a hadith about the distribution of spoils, things like that, because she was there.
That's it. Sorry, I just speak. Sorry, I have to.
Yeah, but then, for example, if you find a hadith that is Ali friendly, saying that, you know, there is one that comes to mind that the Prophet said that me and Ali are like that, and did this with his fingers, so they're very close. So you wouldn't expect to find this hadith narrated by Aisha, for example, because Aisha and Ali, they had a very bad relationship, and Aisha and Fatma had a bad relationship. So the Musnad way is more helpful in determining whether it fits with the narrator or not. Like if you found this in the Musnad of Aisha, I would be suspicious, because, you know, history shows us that the relationship between Aisha and Fatma was not good. Between Aisha and Ali was horrendous.
Couple of things. One is the thing about laughter, and when does it actually stand within our faith? The second thing, one that I seem to remember at least where somewhere, or whatever the circumstances were, when the Prophet actually said something about not laughing but crying, and then later on changed it.
No, he didn't change it, but I have that here. It was towards the end. It went kind of like, if you know what I know, you will laugh a little and
yes,
weep
it's
much.
Weep much more.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. Yes, that was the whole thing. So because I remember now, again, not to individualize it too much, but in my kind of raising, because I was always being the clown, and I loved making my sisters laugh. There was a point at which sometimes it used to irritate my father, and he'd come and say, "Stop it, because you're not allowed to laugh." And I used to say, "Why?" Something that I tried to research.
Yeah.
I did not find enough. It's amazing how much you managed to glean out of it. But the other thing was about hadiths themselves, because with a very specific interest, I was actually amazed to find so little about the Prophet from his wife's point of view. And
no, it's not correct. There is a lot. There is a whole lot from his wives. Aisha is the second most numerous narrator after Abu Hurairah.
yeah,
So,
but
and
she's also discredited quite a lot, isn't she?
by the Shia.
This is what I mean.
But not by the Sunnah.
Well, but I think, forget the sectarian issues. I'm talking about a body of information which doesn't quite collate with human nature for me. For God's sake, if only one woman has an affair with somebody in this culture at the moment, you get so much information out, if they are allowed to, about the individual. And therefore, if you look at the context of the Prophet himself, and that he had so many wives in all the different contexts, I would have expected much more as a volume. So the point I'm leading up to saying is that it seems that not the aggregation of information, but also transmission, is very, very severe, but our literature doesn't quite tend to address all that very easily.
No, but you have so much information. I mean, the hadith that the Prophet's wives narrated, they're not only about fiqh and how to do wudu, or he kissed me when he was fasting, but because there was no desire, it was, and so on. And all these stories, they are collected in the seerah genre, not in the hadith.
And what? Sorry.
Seerah, the biography. Yeah. So you have a whole lot of information about how the internal plays of the households. Prophetic tradition. Traditions or sayings of the Prophet.
Sorry.
Yeah.
It's just a more general question. I mean, I loved listening to your hadiths, and it's the kind of thing before I knew much about Islam, before I read the Qur'an, I read about the Prophet Muhammad's life, and I was amazed to find that he was this, from what I read, he was this sort of man. And I thought, oh my goodness, never in 1,000 years would he's not presented this way in any way at all to the Western or even to the Muslims. So hearing this, what you say is obviously true.
Well, I didn't make it up.
No, exactly. So he is a human being. What made him, what makes a prophet, what makes an extraordinary human extraordinary is the power of their love and the power of communication, their power of healing, which of course he had. I mean, how did he not?
Just the stories about how he played with his grandchildren.
Exactly.
You need to be a child at heart,
Of course.
to be able to horse around with your kids. And this I think that we need to reclaim back our prophet.
This is what I'm saying. What do you think it is? What would you say is the state of mind generally of, let's say, just Muslims, not Shias, but just Muslims in the planet today, if the majority of people have chosen or appear to choose to take that humanity away from their prophet and choose to sort of worship at the door of
No, I think that
of authority, of fear, of conservatism. I'm not talking about liberalism and let's all take our clothes off. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying, coming from Christianity too, Jesus was presented to us, suffering on the cross, not a very nice image, but a man of great healing and love. And I cannot believe that the Prophet Muhammad was not a man of equal, if not greater, and different healing and love. And how could a prophet be a prophet if he didn't embody these things? So why would a religion come away from that?
My personal opinion.
Sorry, I don't think many people perceive the choice that you're talking about. Like, when you ask why would so many Muslims in general choose to see the Prophet ﷺ in this way that we usually do see him, the mainstream way. I don't know that there are that many people that perceive we have a choice, that, it's not just this is how he was, that actually that's far more complicated than that. And, everything Yasmin said about look at all these other different complexities and wordplay and different types of humour. I don't know that many people really, that side, the choices are not presented to us.
We're not as Muslims, we're as human beings.
As anyone who's following a prophetic figure.
No, I think there is also another reason. If you read Ibn Khaldun al-Muqaddimah, you find that every so often the state declines. Okay, for whatever reason, whether it is outside the occupancy by a foreign country or lack of money, so the affairs of the state, they are run down and people are insecure and so on. In those times, you will always find that the clergy oppresses everybody. This is on one hand. On the other hand, you always have the power struggles. Everybody wants you to believe his version. So you can look at it when you study Islamic history about who is leading when. You know, you have Ahl al-Hadith leading at some point. They accepted every hadith even when they knew it was forged because they could use it to manipulate something or other. Or you have, you know, the Mu'tazila they were ruling and they were more about the mind and you need to think and you need to engage your intellect and understand, not just blind follow. And then they were deposed. We had the Ash'arites who are so literal that they believe that God has a hand because the Qur'an says so. They don't acknowledge metaphors and so on. So it's different times, different people in power, they change. This is one thing. And the other thing, you need to remember that the clergy, which shouldn't exist in the first place because Islam is a religion without clergy. Let's, you know, say it, the elephant in the room. So the clergy, they want you to follow. They want a herd to lead. And they don't want anyone to actually think or do his own ijtihad. And like, for example, they force you to read the Quran with a tafsir. You will never be able to read the Quran because your Arabic is not good enough. You cannot translate the Quran. You cannot read between the lines. You have to follow this tafsir, even though this tafsir was written 1,000 years ago and we are now 1,400 years later, and whatever this guy said was true for his time. But today we fly to the moon, we do in vitro fertilization, we do DNA analysis. So things like in fiqh, for example, this idea in fiqh that if you have a child from zina, there is a ruling that you can, you know, a widow can have a baby 4 years up, within 4 years of the death of her husband, and it will still belong to her husband. My personal belief is they did this to protect the woman, because otherwise she would have been, you know, stoned or whatever for adultery. But even they then knew that a pregnancy can only occur within 9 months. Okay? So this was progressive for their time. But today, you don't need to, you know, guess the father. You have a DNA analysis. But does any tafsir even dream of including a DNA? No, because it wasn't an option back then. So we need to stop being, you know, tied to a special Quranic exegesis or we once did this fantastic exercise. We had 20 verses. They are called problematic verses, you know, like hitting the wives or whatever. So if you Google problematic verses, you will find them. So we had these 20 verses, and then we had 20, it was in a table. We had 20 different tafsirs from various things, sectarian, you know, Shia tafsir, Sunni tafsir, Mu'tazila tafsir, linguistic tafsir, modern tafsir, and so on. And when you read them as a whole in a table, you would never ever think that these 20 people were talking about the same book. Seriously, literally. And then we were given the context in which each and every single mufassir wrote his tafsir. So you'd have like Al-Tabari. Al-Tabari was Persian. In Persia, the national dress was this black tent. 1,000 years before Islam. For him, the normal thing, when he reads, you know, يُدْنِينَ مِنْ خِمَارِهِنَّ عَلَى جُيُوبِهِنَّ, for him, the normal thing is this black chador. This is what comes to his mind, you know. And he was an orphan. He was raised in a military garrison. His brother, a soldier, raised him. He hasn't seen a woman until he was like 24 years old. So for him, the women should not be seen, they should not be heard, they must be hidden away somewhere, because this was his context. Then you read Ibn Taymiyyah, for example. He was living at the time of the Mongol invasion. So for him, everything is with the sword, and fight them wherever you find them, and, you know, hide the women because they're going to be raped in the street, and so on. So if you put everyone in his context, you will, Ibn Kathir, for example, he was an orphan, he was raised by his mother. He had a mufassira to teach him the Qur'an, a muhadditha to teach him hadith, a faqiha woman. Even the one who taught him to ride and to shoot the bow and arrow was a woman, because his mother was very religious. So she only allowed women into her house. So when you read his tafsir, you know, the women, they're so kind, treat them kindly. And when you know, they're the... So, and also if you look at the marriage, for for example, what the fuqaha did with that, in the Quran you have وَخَلَقْنَا لَكُم مِّنْ أَنفُسِكُم, from you we have created a partner, you know, and we made between you love and mercy and companionship, and you are garments for each other, you know. It's a warm feeling when you think, you know, like going under the duvet or something. But then the fiqh turns this around and it becomes a contract, a sale, where the husband pays the dowry for legal sex. So where is the love and the compassion and, you know, the companionship and all that evaporates. So I think that it was deliberate that they created this. Yeah, it's like, you know, sanam. You know, the kuffar, yeah, the kuffar were praying to a sanam, and this is how they turned the Prophet. They turned him into this other sanam who doesn't feel, who is not human, and he is up there on a pedestal somewhere where nobody can touch him, and we just have to emulate what the clergy think is emulatable or emulate-worthy or whatever. But he himself and his spirit and, you know, the way he interacted with his wives, with his children is lost, and this is a pity.
If you say that Islam shouldn't have clergy, well, in a place like sort of presumably Iran, they have clerics. What is the English version of an ayatollah? What's the word? What is the English equivalent of the word? Because isn't an ayatollah a clergy?
Yes, but in Islam, I mean literally, when you read the Quran, it says your relationship is between you and God, and you do not need a middleman.
Yes, like the Quakers.
So the imam is to lead prayers.
Sorry?
The imam is to lead prayers.
Yeah.
That's it. Perform marriages.
He's a facilitator.
Yeah, he is to read the Quran when there is a deceased person, something like that. But he is not to tell you.
But then, why don't people challenge the whole concept of clergy then?
Because that has been lost. It was like that in the early days. But, you know, slowly and surely this institution developed and developed some more, and now we have...
But why isn't this challenged?
It's the same reason that this government has criminalised protest. I mean, there's so much that we, just as citizens of Britain, don't challenge, and it's for a myriad of reasons. Part of that reasoning is the government for decades now has slowly criminalised protest. Every protest has become more and more worthless and more dangerous. So when people now are in an apathetic state where they just, you know, don't feel like they can challenge changes that are being made on behalf of them, it's very similar to the way Muslims see ayatollahs and clerics. It's like, what can we do? It's not the efficacy, the power that they have as individuals is not perceived by them. So that's one of the reasons that I think people don't challenge.
And I think there is also a question of who is disseminating knowledge about Islam. We go back to the golden rule, those with the gold paper rules. All the books here are from Saudi Arabia. People who go to Hajj, they are given cassettes, etc., with the Saudi version of Islam. And that is what people have access to. So I'm afraid...
Even, for example, growing Muslim communities in, say, in South America, if it's the Saudis that are funding the construction of mosques in Argentina, for example, then you'll have the Saudi versions of whatever in Argentina now, today, 21st century.
Yes, very Puritan, which is very...
Did the Saudis have this preeminence before oil was discovered?
No.
Egypt was sending the kiswa of the Kaaba, you know, the cover of the Kaaba every year. And before that, in Ayyubid times, it was the Syrians who were doing that. It is whoever had the money, the golden rule.
Sorry, may I ask you, just to play devil's advocate here for your opponents, you are now judging this information based on matan or content as opposed to isnad, chain of narration, right?
Yes. But I'm not the only one who did this. The Muslim scholars in medieval times already did
Could the conservatives then say to you the veracity of the information which you are transmitting is not as solid as the later Sahih collections?
Yes, they could say that, but then I will reply with I am just following in the footsteps of Ibn Hajar, Ibn Qutayba, Al-Khattabi, Ibn Rajab. They also did that. You had different people working on different methodologies.
Sorry. I think that's a good place to stop, that you're following in historical traditions of questioning,
I
of
hope.